All right. Okay. Okay. Do you see my screen, everyone? Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining the last day of FLUXNET ECN annual workshop. My name is Hojin Lee, and I will moderate today's workshop with Seungmin Sun together. So before we start the workshop, I will give you short notice. For 2 hours of workshop, there will be three presentations from invited speakers, and followed by Q&A time. The workshop will also result in a community Q&A platform for mentor-mentee engagement in the Slack channel. I hope you've already joined the Slack channel yesterday. During the workshop, all presentations will be recorded so that you can watch the videos again at the AmeriFlux YouTube channel later. If you couldn't participate the workshop for day 1 and day 2, you can find the link in our Slack channel for the recorded videos. After workshop, please share your ideas and opinions on the workshop by taking 5 minutes of your time. It will be much helpful for us to plan future FLUXNET ECN workshops. Okay, today I'm very honored to have 3 great scientists from Japan, Australia, and China. Our first speaker is Dr. Kazuhito Ichii. Dr. Kazuhito Ichii is currently a professor at Center for Environmental Remote Sensing, Chiba University, and the chair of Asia Flux and Japan Flux. He received his PhD degree in Earth Sciences from Nagoya University, Japan in 2002, and subsequently worked at Nagoya University, NASA Arms Research Center, Fukushima University, and JAMSTEC before taking his current position in 2017. He has nearly 20 years of research experience in understanding the atmospheric terrestrial greenhouse gas exchanges using an approach that integrates multiple methods, including ground-based network data, satellite observations, numerical models, and machine learning. Today, he will talk about hyper-temporal terrestrial vegetation monitoring by geostationary satellites, a new research opportunity. So, Dr. Kazuhito Ichii, if you are ready, would you please start your presentation?
Very much for the introduction, Hojin. And okay, so let me share the screen. Okay, and okay. So the hope the screen share is working. Is working? Okay, thank you very much. And okay, so thank you very much for the introduction, introducing me. And so my name is Kazuhito Ichii from the Center for Environmental Remote Sensing, Chiba University. And so in today's presentation, I'm going to introduce my recent work, so using the geostationary satellites. But so geostationary satellites is, I believe, the originally so developed for the meteorological observation, such as a cloud or some of the sea surface temperature. But so recently, so that we can use so these geostationary satellites for the terrestrial vegetation monitoring, and also so these satellite data so provides a very different and unique data compared with the existing, so most commonly used satellite data, so for the terrestrial vegetation, such as the MODIS. So, and also it's very important, so the FLUXNET data or eddy covariance tower data is very important to test for these remote sensing, so new geostation satellite data. And so let me start. So first of all, so let me briefly to talk about difference between the so the traditional Earth observation satellite, so which is called as a polar orbiting satellite. So the typical one is let's say like a NOAA, AVHR, or Terra Modis or Aqua Modis, and so these satellites, so actually they observe the Earth as a global coverage, so which rotating the centering, passing the North Pole and South Pole, and so these satellites, so we can observe the globally, and so we know that these satellites can observe global, but so we can observe like once a day at the same position in the Earth. And the geostationary satellite, so which is originally used for the weather monitoring, such as a cloud, so moving a cloud, and so it's actually that look at the same position towards the, looking at the Earth surfaces. So in the case of for example, one Japanese satellite, so Himawari, so this image is a kind of the observation spatial range of the Himawari 8. So it can observe only the half hemisphere, but so it can observe very high temporal frequency images, such as 10 minutes. Every 10 minutes, so they can observe the Earth surfaces. So we can use these satellite images, so geostationary satellite images, to make like a Earth observation better. So this is one example of the MODIS comparing the MODIS image, so polar orbiting satellites, so typically use the terrestrial monitoring, and this is the Himawari 8, so geostationary satellite. So it's a one-day image. So Terra Modis. So for example, this is a stitching a whole one-day images, but it have a lot of cloud. And so if we look at the Himawari 8 images, so we see the every 10 days images. So we can get like a very significant larger amount of the data from the Himawari 8. So, and also the recent advancement of these geostationary satellite is so actually these new satellites, geostationary new satellites, have similar wavelengths between comparing with the typical sensors such as MODIS. So if we look at the band wavelengths, so Himawari 8 and MODIS have a very similar wavelength coverage, and which means we can monitor terrestrial surface in the similar way with MODIS. But difference is Himawari 8 or geostationary satellite can observe every 10 minutes. So it's very different. And so we have more and more data. So compare with the MODIS. So let's say so we can have a very huge amount of the data. Observation frequency compared with the MODIS or typical Earth observation satellites. And we have we need a lot of challenges. So yeah, because these satellites are basically provided as a top of atmosphere. So we need to convert all the information to a top of canopy information. Okay, and so another thing is so I said that so for example, one geostationary satellite can observe the half hemisphere, but to make global observation, so we need to have a global network, but actually many different countries already launched their geostationary satellites. So we can combine these different satellites to make a global and very high temporal resolution data sets. So by combining these data, and so one thing I would like to note is if we look at the Asia region, so there is already like a Japanese Himawari 8 and the Korean GK2A and the Chinese Fenyang 4 data are observing in the like a very similar and have they covered each other's regions. So it's very nice, like a unique opportunity to get a, so for example, in the one position from the 3 different satellites. And also, so we know that so India also have a so satellite, similar satellite, so about the Indian Ocean. So by combining these 4, so we can make a lot of like a good images for the Asia and Pacific, Asia and Oceania region. So anyway, so one example, so let me show the one example about the application of the geostationary satellites. So this is a one case example. So Takayama, so forest sites, which is registered to Asia Flux and FLUXNET. And so if we, so this is a camera, so image of the canopy, so taking from the top of the tower to the below, And so if we look at, so this is a, so image is so Suomi NPP, I mean VIAs. So typical like a sensor, typical Earth observation sensor. So this is, and also sensor is a VIAs have a, so one time in a day, like so they can observe one time in a day, and so they can observe every day, and so we see a lot of the like low value shows mostly for the cloud contaminated pixels. Okay, and so if we apply, so Himawari 8 data, so we can see a lot of drastic increase in the observation number of the observations, and also so if we increase the number of observations, so we can get like a high possibility to get a better images. So in general, so that if we track the top of the this curve, so we can so that is a mostly the cloud-free best data, and so we can get a very smooth seasonal variation of the phenologies, so observed by the NDVI. Okay, so using the these information, so we expect, so for example, so we can get a temporal resolution of the this good data, NDVI data. So originally was about more than 10 days interval, but so if we use Himawari, so we can use in this site, so we can get every 4 days good images. So we can reduce we can improve the temporal resolution of the phenology observation. And so this is another example of the geostationary satellite. So we can, this is a ideal image, but so this is a typical image of the like a stomata, so changing the stomata activities, and so in the heat wave or hot day, so some stomata shows some of the drop in the afternoon, so called the midday drop. And so we can observe such, we are trying to observe such kind of some drop in the either photosynthesis or transpiration. So using that, this geostationary satellite, because it has a 10 minutes temporal resolution, and so there's a lot of possibility to catch such a like a quick signal, or like a urgently quickly changing signal, from the geostationary satellite. Okay, so let me briefly summarize about the advantage of the hyper-temporal geostationary satellite for the terrestrial monitoring. So one thing is we can expect we can expect shorter composite period. For example, typical MODIS data use a 8-day composite. But for example, let's say we can reduce it by for example 3-day composite. So we can improve the temporal resolution of the satellite observation. But another thing is that we can also expect, if the region is heavily covered by the cloud, such as the tropical Southeast Asia, so we can get some signal from the tropical and vegetation. So although so previous MODIS sensor was very difficult to get the cloud-free observation. And the other one, so opportunity, so what so we are thinking is so using the information of the diurnal variation. So for example, diurnal variation of land surface temperature or diurnal variation of the like a solar radiation, so we can estimate so GPP or ET or so something like that. So I will show the more clear like example in the later. Okay. So this is a okay. So some of the example of the already published papers of the application of the so these geostationary satellites. So one is so shorter, so can expect the shorter composite period to make a shorter like a phenological data, and so that already actually so that tested on the, for example, Takayama, I mean Asia and also Africa, and also so this is a so heavily cloud contaminated region. So tropical region is already did some analysis from the Amazon, and also so the some trial to test estimate 30 minutes GPP. So using the GK2A from the Korea group, and also so we are also trying to make use of the diurnal land surface temperature variation to estimate some of the stress, vegetation, water stress conditions. Okay. And so our team is actually so I said that so Himari 8 or geostationary very hard to make it useful for the land surface monitoring, but so our group is trying to make it useful. I mean, try to extract some information on the land surfaces, and so actually so our center is so getting the original so Himawari data from the JMA, Japan Meteorological Agency, and to make it useful for the public users. And so our group is also trying to use so these like top of atmosphere information to get the surface information, to retrieve the surface information, so include the including the reflectance and also land surface temperatures. And in addition, so we can also get a cloud mask information. And further, so we are also trying to process further and try to get a vegetation index, radiation, GPPET or FRI or something else. And so far, so we did some advancement. So we have a topo atmosphere information and also some solar radiation, and also we have LST and also cloud mix. And so this gray check is so we are still working. But so once so we are ready to publish, I mean issue the data set, so we would like to open to the public. So this is one example. So we estimate how to estimate so surface reflectance from the original so Himawari data. Actually, so original Himawari data is here, and so we do so all the like run the atmospheric radiative transfer code to get some lookup table, and so we input the so atmospheric information and get the surface reflectance. And furthermore, so using this surface reflectance information, so we also run the bidirectional distribution function, and so we try to also normalize, I mean the angular collected land surface reflectors. So all the processes so we are doing by my group. Okay, and so this is one example. So surface shortwave radiation, it's a colleague in the same center, and so land surface temperature. So we have such kind of the 10 minutes interval products for the Asia and Oceania regions. And so let me introduce one application of the application Southeast Asia region. So because the Southeast Asia is a very like a heavily cloud contaminated regions, and it's very difficult to get some of the signal from the typical Earth observation satellites such as MODIS or VIIRS. And so we try to apply we try to apply Himawari data for this region. So this region is actually very heavily, it has a heavy precipitation and very frequent cloud cover. And we test both of the Terra Modis and Aqua Modis and the Himawari 8, and using the both data. So actually, Modis sensor have two different like observation time. So onboarding the different sensors. So Terra Modis observe the Earth surface around the 10:30, and Aqua Modis observe 1:30, and so we can combine both of them, and also we can also check the Himawari 8. So we evaluate how many like ground contaminated pixels over the 16-day period. So typical range of the composite period of the NDVI or vegetation index. So if we see Modis Terra and Modis Aqua independently, so we see that in the 16-day, so 30 or 40%. So many regions have contaminated by the clouds. And sorry, so this is So this is a whole 1 year image, and so this is a 16-day composite. So number of the day, where clear sky data is not available. I mean, cloud, all the 16 days covered by the cloud. So it means that these these images show that almost 30% or 40%. So yellow means period is covered by the cloud within that day, within that year. And so if we use the Himawari data, so we have almost like a no cloud cover contaminated data. So if we take a 16-day composite period. Okay. And and also this is one example. So 160-day period. And so we can get a better clear images of the NDVI. So if we use 16 days, and so if we take a 16-day composite from the Terra and Modis, so white color shows a missing pixels. So all 16 days were covered by the cloud. Okay, so by just looking at the 116-day images, so we see that a lot of difference between the Himawari 8 and the Modis sensors. And furthermore, so if we more clearly look at the sites of the, for example, this is a Ranville Hill site, so the site location of Ranville Hills, and so we see, so if we use the Ichii and Himawari data, NDVI or EBI2, so we can get almost like a whole year data. But if we use Modis data, so we see a lot of missing data, so which was difficult to observe the whole year seasonal variations. So okay, and additionally, so I show some example of the application of the geostationary satellite. So we also do a LAI, so leaf area index or FPAR estimations, and so using the canopy radiative transfer model, flies, and the Himawari observation. So if we use these observation, Himawari observation, geostationary satellite observation, we can expect to get that. So this is one image, but so we can get the shorter composite period compared with the Modis. And so if we also try to estimate the FPAR, so we can also get a diurnal variation. So FPAR variation in a day. So we just actually calculated the separated. So light is separated to a direct radiation and the diffuse radiation. So diffuse radiation shows a constant FPAR over the day, but the direct radiation FPAR shows some of the clear changes in the day. So is the lowest value in the noon because of the sun is almost like a vertical. I mean, so like a less like a long optical depth. in the leaf. And but in the morning or evening, so the sun is like a sun elevation is lower, so that it will pass more like optical length or in terms of the leaf. So that will make, I mean, increase a more absorption of the sunlight by the leaf. So that will make a higher FPER. So we are, yeah, so also checking so how much so these FPER changes is to improve the GPPs. And I think it's almost last slides. And so we are also trying to make use of the diurnal land surface temperature variations. So which is so we have a 1 day LSD, and so we can fit so these variations. So using the diurnal temperature model, so which is a semi-empirical model to reproduce so change in the land surface temperature in a day. So so we extract, for example, one parameter, so diurnal temperature range, and so we estimate so diurnal temperature range from the land surface temperatures. Actually, so for example, diurnal temperature range information is a good indicator to express the vegetation drought stress status. So if the surface is dry, so diurnal temperature range should be like a very high. But so if the surface is wet and vegetation is wet, so diurnal temperature range should be like a lower, so compare with the dry conditions. So so we extracted so diurnal temperature anomalies in the heat wave days, and that so try to make a comparison with the vegetation signal. And also we did some of the experiment in the site level analysis. Okay. So and finally, so that I will just introduce my project, so which was started from the last year. So we are actually so working together as an international collaboration. So US, including US and Korea, China, and also Australia. So in terms of the spatial coverage. And so we are working among the 5 countries. And so we have a 5-year funding, and so we try to make some kind of network of the geostationary satellites. And so this is one so just like a next week workshop, but so we have a first expert workshop on the geostationary satellite application to the terrestrial monitoring, and we held which will be held in Hawaii. But so online option is available. So if you have interest in the joining, you can still so register to the workshop, or you can send me an email to me. And so we have so special issues to the 2 journals. So one is a remote sensing environment, and the other one is a remote sensing. So these are still open, and so we're happy to have a submission on the geostationary satellite issues. So okay, so I'm closing the talk, and so we initiated international project of networking of geostationary satellites to make it useful for the terrestrial vegetation monitoring. And actually, so Asia Oceania is a very hot region, important region. So applying the geostationary satellite, because we have 3 or 4 satellites in this region. And so our group is working on the data processing, and if the data is ready, so we are clear, so open to the public. So we expect more and more collaborations, and so many applications. And so last thing is actually so important. So geostationary satellite is launched in around 2015 or later. So we need like a very latest data of the eddy covariance. And so we are actually so happy to collaborate with the site peers. So let me know so if you have any questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dr. Tajito Ichii. So, okay, you have to go earlier, right?
Yeah. So, but still, so I have time. Yeah.
Okay, so if there is any questions from the audience, please leave at our chat box, or you can leave your questions in our Slack channel. Okay, our second speaker is Dr. Anna Ukkola, and she is a lecturer at the University of New South Wales in Sydney, Australia, where she has been working for the past 8 years. She previously completed a PhD at Macquarie University, understanding water vegetation interactions at global and regional scales. Her research focuses on understanding how the land surface is responding to climate change and how we can better model land processes. She is in particular interested in drought impacts and has used FLUXNET data to understand limitations in land models in simulating drought. Anna has developed a software tool to transform FLUXNET data for use in land modeling and currently co-leads a global land model evaluation project using FLUXNET sites. Today, we will talk about applications of FLUXNET data in ecosystem modeling. So Anna, if you are ready, would you please start your presentation?
Yes. It says I can't start yet. Okay. Here we go. You able to see that all okay?
Yeah, everything is okay.
Okay, great. So thank you for the introduction, Ho-Jin, and for the invitation to speak here. It's a real pleasure, and well done to the organizers for putting together such a variety of topics for this workshop. It looks really fantastic. So I was tasked with talking about how we use FLUXNET data for modeling. So my talk will be about that. So I'll mention some findings FLUXNET has enabled in the modeling space, some pros and cons of using FLUXNET data for modeling. And then I'll also talk about some infrastructure we've developed in this space. And finally, I'll touch upon what we call Plumber 2 project, which is an international model intercomparison project at FluxSites. So when I talk about models, in this case, I'm talking about land surface models and ecosystem models quite widely. So what they're normally tasked with doing is modeling the various processes on the land surface, ranging from the energy fluxes, hydrology, and obviously the carbon cycling. And what you probably start to notice here is that a lot of the things the models simulate are also things that flux towers measure for us. So we get a lot of the core variables for modeling from flux towers, ranging from the incoming outgoing radiation fluxes, latent heat, sensible heat, evaporation being the same as latent heat. Some sites also measure soil moisture. And then for the carbon cycle, we get the net ecosystem exchange, which can then be split to photosynthesis, respiration. So we really get a wealth of data from flux towers to help us with modeling questions. So why is flux tower so useful for modeling, apart from measuring all these things? One of the key things is that we get both model input and model evaluation data from the same flux site. So to run these models, we need to tell them what the meteorological conditions were at high resolution. So we need things like rainfall, solar radiation, humidity, air temperature to run these models with. And we get all this data from flux sites. We also get all those data that the models themselves stimulate to evaluate their outputs. So things like latent, sensible heat, any ground heat flux, and so forth. So we get a consistent measurements of the MET and flux data at the same high temporal resolution. And that's really unique in this space. We don't really have this consistency of data from other sources. The other advantage is that we get really high temporal resolution data from flux towers, giving representative values for modeling. So for a lot of these models, particularly land surface models, which are used in climate modeling, and we need to run them at sub-daily timescales for numerical stability, but also to better represent the process. And FLUXNET gives us the highest temporal resolution data available for this purpose. We normally use data at half-hourly to hourly timescales. And that allows us to look at these sub-diurnal processes and run the models at those scales that they were really designed to be run at. Another advantage is that a lot of the model parameters and other information we need are directly measurable at flux sites. So this could be information like the soil properties or the vegetation properties. It varies quite a lot by site, what kind of information we get, but generally compared to large scale credit data, we have a much better handle of these site properties. And that helps us constrain the models. Another huge advantage, things are getting better and better, is that flux sites now cover a variety of biomes and climates across the globe. There's now hundreds of sites, and we were able to get our hands on over 200 sites for our modeling purposes. So we're really starting to get a good coverage, ranging from rainforest to boreal forests, savannas, grasslands. So these are really helping us to develop these models further and try and make them representative of as many global biomes as possible. Another advantage of flux sites is the diversity in both the individuals taking the measurements, but also how the sites are set up, how the data is processed. So this means we have a lot of independent samples of things like evaporation. And this means that if we find, for example, systematic biases in models, we can be quite confident that those are really a modeling problem because the data we have is quite independent. If we use models to evaluate them against credit data, often we have to rely on one product that has been processed in one particular way and it has its own biases. So it can be hard to tell where the biases are coming from. So there's a lot of independence in the flux data that really helps us with this. And another huge advantage is that the flux data is such high resolution, but we also have sites that now span multiple years, the longest records being, I think, over 20 years, if even longer now. This allows us to evaluate and develop models at timescales ranging from these really fine sub-diurnal half-hourly timescales all the way to monthly seasonal timescales, and to multi-year timescales to look at interannual variability. So this is massively useful. We can look at the same model process across these different timescales to understand what's going on. So next, I just wanted to highlight a couple of key findings that FluxTower has enabled in the modeling space. So the first big one is obviously insights into carbon and water cycling, which is one of the key things flux towers measure for us directly. So this study by Trevor Keenan, a fairly famous one, looking at changes in water use efficiency. So that's the ratio of how much plants are photosynthesizing versus losing water from evaporation. A nice metric integrating the carbon water cycling. So Trevor's study showed that there's been large observed increases in the water use efficiency with increasing CO2 over forested flux tower sites. So this kind of these lines here. What was shown that the models didn't reproduce this trend. Now I will say this observed result is somewhat contested, but nevertheless, this finding led us to re-examine the carbon and water relationships in models. And flux towers have enabled us to do this much better because we don't have these direct observations for these key variables from other sources, with some exceptions coming now, like SIF from satellites. Another hugely valuable thing has been to look at extreme events. So some examples are drought impacts on ecosystems, heat waves, and also land-atmosphere coupling during extreme events. So one example I'll just highlight from my own work was looking at how models are simulating evapotranspiration during drought periods. So here's 6 different sites showing 1 year of data. And the rainfall bars are here, so you can kind of see these drought periods in these data sets. And the black line is what we have observed from the flux towers, and these colored lines are different models. And we were able to show that across multiple flux sites, we have these huge systematic biases in how these major land surface models are simulating evapotranspiration during drought. And this was already a well-known problem, but we were managed to demonstrate just how systematic it was. And this has led to a lot of re-examination of these processes as well. Here being one example from Manon Sabor, for example, to develop new parameterizations for these models to address this problem. In her case, by trying to introduce plant hydraulics into models. So the third example I have is using these flux towers to constrain model estimates. So we need to rely on model outputs to obtain carbon, energy, and water variables for a lot of applications. But of course, they can be very uncertain. And FLUXNET has been proven to be valuable for constraining these models. So here's an example from my colleague Sana Hobeichi, where she took a bunch of credit model products of ET, and she used FLUXNET data from over 100 sites to then constrain these model estimates, kind of to try and push them towards these observations to reduce the biases and increase our confidence in these credit global ET estimates. And another example here I'll highlight by Vanessa Havard was to use flux data as part of other data sources to constrain and obtain an Australia-wide estimate of our carbon balance and our carbon budget, which hadn't been done before. And I could mention many, many more examples. This literature goes back probably at least 20 years using models, using flux tower data to evaluate and develop models. So really a huge amount of stuff has been done in this space to help models. But there are also some challenges in using FLUXNET data in modeling. So these flux tower data releases like FLUXNET 2015, ICUS are really, really great. Most of the hard work has already been done for us to clean up and process this data. But even so, we can't directly use these for modeling. So we need to do additional quality control, gap fill, and standardize these data. And one reason is that we can't really have data looking like this in modeling, where we have large periods, for example, gap filled in the data. And that's because the model processes aren't just instantaneous. There are also state variables like soil moisture in the models that will get biased if we give them unrealistic data like this. So we have to screen the data and often remove periods of poor data. Another issue, we don't always get fully gap-filled data or all the variables that we need for modeling. For example, some releases are missing incoming long-wave radiation, or it might have gaps depending on the data release. And we have to give the models continuous data. So we need to do lots of gap filling and synthesizing these variables in some cases. And we also need to standardize the data. So most models need netcdf files rather than CSVs. They need specific variable names. We need to transform units, data formats, and so forth. So there can be quite a lot of extra work still on top of all the processing that has already happened. And we often do this on an ad hoc basis for specific studies. And additionally, we often use extra metadata such as the measurement heights or information about the vegetation type specific to modeling to use these data. And there are also other issues like energy balance closure, which also affects modeling. But I think these are wider issues with flux data that are not just unique to modeling. So I won't go into those too much. So what we have done is develop an R package to automate all this processing for modeling. So it's a reproducible framework for processing FLUXNET data for modeling to try and stop it from being such an ad hoc process and to develop a community tool. So this package can take data from FLUXNET 2015, ICUS and OSFlux. It can also take lateral data, but I think it's no longer recommended to use that release. And the really great thing is that this framework, this processing pipeline is now being included in the OneFlux software package, which is used by FLUXNET to create these big data releases. So I'm actually hoping our package will become redundant, and this will instead become an automated part of OneFlux soon, hopefully. So this modeling data would actually be released with the normal FLUXNET data automatically for everyone to grab. But yeah, in the meantime, this package is available on GitHub to convert these data sets for modeling purposes. And we've also already published a data set for 170 sites globally specifically for modeling purposes. So these are netcdfs and we fully quality control them, both using this automated software, but then we've also used expert judgment on top of that to try and pick out as much high quality data as possible. So we have fairly global coverage of this data in this data set, covering quite a long time period of data for many sites, different biomes, and we also capture the global temperature, precipitation, climate envelope fairly well with this release. So this is the paper documenting that. So if anyone's wanting to use this data for modeling applications, it's available. We've tried to do some of the hard work for the community. We also have an online platform where you can access this data, but also site information. So this was developed to compare models against flux observations, currently mostly using these 170 sites. And you can also do comparisons to other models and benchmarks at these flux sites using this online tool, if that's of interest. And we've also collated information about the 170 sites on this website with some modeling specific information as well, like information about the soil or the vegetation, measurement heights and so forth. So that's all openly available. And the other reason I want to mention is that it's used for what we call the Plumber 2 project. So it's the land surface model benchmarking and evaluation project. It's the biggest one of its kind so far. So there was a previous one using 20 flux sites, but we've now extended it to 170 sites. And I just wanted to say a bit more about this project, because I think there's also nice opportunities in this space to look at these simulations for anyone interested in this modeling aspect. So what Plumber 2 is it's land and ecosystem model simulations at these 170 sites globally. And so far we have submissions from at least 18 different modeling groups internationally. And we have a bunch of different models. We have land surface models from the climate modeling community, but also carbon cycle and hydrology models from more the ecosystem communities. So a nice variety of models. And this project wasn't merely developed for evaluation, but also benchmarking. So that's setting a priori expectations for the models. And my colleague has developed different benchmarks that can be used to test the models. And all of this data was put together for the community, so it's available for all of you to explore. Not that much work has yet been done with this data, so I think there's some real insights to be gained. It's by far the biggest collection of model simulations at flux size that we have. So I just want to highlight a couple of early results we have so far, just to give you a flavor of what's there. So this figure just shows the latent heat against the sensible heat, average across all the sites for the different models that we have. So you can already see quite a bit of spread in where the models lie. And just to highlight a few things. So here I've just highlighted some widely used models like CLM, JULES, and Orchidea, and also these benchmarks. So some of these are very simple things like a linear regression of latent heat against solar radiation. So basically try and predict latent heat or sensible heat just from some of the simple meteorological variables that we give to the models. And one of the big revelations from the first phase of Plumber was that these are often better than our models. So a lot of effort is going into understanding why this is. And of course, understanding where these model biases are coming from for the different models. You can also get plots. So these are actually plots from the modelevaluation.org web platforms, which you can automatically generate there. So this is an example for the cable model, showing this same latent heat against sensible heat for all the different sites that we have. And these lines are the distances between the observations and the models. So we can start to look at the spread for individual models at different sites. And we can also start to understand why some of these sites are modeled so poorly. So in this example, for example, we have some sites where the model is way off the observations. And in this case, it turned out that these are irrigated and wetland sites. And these are processes that cable doesn't really consider. So perhaps not surprising it did such a poor job. We can also look at lots of different other information. This is, for example, looking at the density distributions of latent and sensible heat across all the sites, these different lines being different models. And we can start to look at the differences. And turns out this can also be a really great tool to pick up model bugs, really. So for cable, we found out it has lots of zero latent heat values, which we think are not realistic at all. So we can start to look into these problems. Also these peaks in these latent sensible heat plots for some other models. So these were just a couple of simple metrics to show you. So we are just preparing these early results as the first manuscript. There are lots and lots of different opportunities to look at this data, being interannual variability, extremes, all sorts of different things. So if anyone is interested, we would love to have more people look into this data. Oh. Now, before I finish, I was also asked to talk about leadership and how to build collaborations and networks in the FLUXNet space. I don't have any particularly insightful ideas, but I'll just mention a few things that I guess have helped my career and yeah, from my own experience. So really, I would just encourage you to get involved in whatever you're interested in. So these little things often become bigger things over time. So I don't actually even quite remember how I end up involved in this Plumber 2 project, how I ended up, so I prepared all this data for it. I think it just came about by chance, really, by having done a little bit in this space in the first place. So hopefully during this workshop, you've all identified something that you're interested in the FLUXNet space, and you could get involved. Even if you feel like you're not the expert in a particular thing at this moment, you can always learn on the job, really. I think the main thing is to get involved. And my other tip would be to reach out and get others involved in your own work. So I like to invite co-authors or others involved in my work, just because I think it's actually really great scientifically. You can always get lots of great ideas from other people. And I think that has really provided lots of useful insight into my own work. But it's also a nice way to reach out to other people and start building those networks, rather than waiting for someone to come to you. And if you like the sound of Plumber and you think modeling might be a cup of tea, or if you're already working on this, do join the team Plumber 2. We've got likely quite a few opportunities coming up. So there's already lots of opportunities to work in the science space, look at this data. And that can get you quite a lot of exposure, because these data were created by lots of different modeling groups around the world. So you can get a lot of exposure to those. But we're also looking to do things like run workshops and so forth on using these data going forward. So if you're interested, we will definitely be looking to have ECR participation and leadership in this space. So really, please do get in touch if you'd like to be involved in any way in this project. Yeah, that's all for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Anna, Ukkola. Is there any questions from the audience? If you have any questions, just leave in our chat box, so she can answer to your question. And
yeah, I'm also on the Slack channel, so I'm happy if you think of anything later. I'll keep an eye on. Yeah, happy to answer anything.
Actually, I have one question, but I can ask you later. Okay, our third speaker is Dr. Shuli Liu.
Yes.
Okay, Dr. Shuli Liu is a professor in Institute of Geographic Sciences and Natural Resources Research, Chinese Academy of Science since 2013. She received her PhD degree in the Institute of Botany, Chinese Academy of Sciences, in 2004, and worked as a postdoc research fellow at Department of Microbiology and Plant Biology, University of Oklahoma, USA, from 2008 to 2012. Her research interests include, but not limited to, global change and terrestrial ecosystem functions. So Dr. Liu has published more than 200 peer-reviewed papers in international journals, which have been cited over 15,000 times with H index of 64. She has served as associate editors of Journal of Geophysical Research, Biogeosciences, ecology letters, and so on. Today, she will talk about thermal optimality of ecosystem carbon fluxes learned from FLUXNET. So, Dr. Shuli, if you are ready, would you please start your presentation?
Yeah, thanks, Ho-Jin, for the nice introduction. Good morning, everyone. And I'm trying to share the screen. Okay, good. It works, right? Okay, good. So it's my great pleasure to have a chance to exchange ideas and my experience in working with the FLUXNET datasets. I would like to say that I really enjoyed using the FLUXNET data to exploring some, scientific questions in ecosystem ecology. So today I would like to share some of my experience by using FLUXNET data in studying the thermal optimality of ecosystem carbon fluxes. I would like to start my talk with a few concepts. Actually, one ubiquitous property of a biological system is thermal optimization, which is adopted by organisms to optimize their functioning and their varying temperature. For example, thermal acclimation happens when organisms have physiological adjustment to dampen the impact of temperature variability. And actually, it usually refers to the short-term adjustments when temperature return to the original conditions. The physiological adjustment or physiological traits can also return to the original status. So that is a thermal acclimation. But for thermal adaptation, actually it results from the changes in genetic makeups to optimize the uses of thermal environments. It usually happens for the long-term changes. So when temperature return to the original conditions, those kind of the adjustments cannot return to the original status. That's the difference between the acclimation and the adaptation. I think we all are familiar with the thermal acclimation of leaf photosynthesis and respiration, right? For leaf photosynthesis, the plants living in warmer environment, as indicated by this pink curve, usually has a higher optimum temperature than the plants living in colder environment. So that's we call it the thermal acclimation of leaf photosynthesis. For the leaf respiration, usually it had a lower temperature sensitivity. We call it Q10, which means that when temperature increased to 10 degrees centigrade, how much of the time of respiration changes. So we can see this temperature sensitivity of leaf respiration also lower and warmer environment than the colder environments. Also, we found the thermal acclimation of soil respiration, including the root and the microbial respiration. For example, in a warming experiment, we found that actually under the warmer treatment, soil respiration had a lower temperature sensitivity than the soil respiration under the unwarmed conditions. And similarly, this change of the soil respiration, decreasing temperature sensitivity of soil respiration to temperature actually have a good relationship with the environmental temperature. It decreased with the environmental temperature. So which means that higher temperature associated with a lower Q10, lower temperature sensitivity. So I worked for the microbial process. I worked with Fanny and others and to develop a concept about the microbial traits, including the microbial carbon use efficiency, microbial composition, and also the microbial allocation. All those microbial traits had clear temperature response curves. And so as a whole, microbial activity should have this kind of the optimum temperature along with the temperature change. So this is just a perspective. So fortunately, one of my colleagues did an incubation experiment in the lab with the bacterial growth rate. And actually, they found that the bacterial growth rate all have those kind of the optimum temperature with increasing temperature. Actually, it apparently supports our perspective, our ideas on the optimum temperature of microbial activities. So because plants, microbial, all those organisms have the optimum temperature, as a ecosystem ecologist, we should, I think it's very interesting to ask would the ecosystem with an assembly of organisms also undergo the thermal optimality under climate change, under climate warming conditions? So this question is very simple, but I think it's very important and very useful for better predict the future carbon cycling and the future climate change. So with the FLUXNET datasets, we think it provides an ideal data platform for us to explore the temperature response of ecosystem at the ecosystem levels. So we know that currently we have almost 1,500 site years of data. We call it flux everywhere all of the time. So with those big data base, it's and I think it's an ideal opportunity to explore the temperature response of ecosystem carbon fluxes and whether there is any optimum temperature for the ecosystem carbon fluxes. And we summarized, we reviewed the use of FLUXNET data and summarized the papers published in a journal, Global Change Biology. And actually we found that in the past 25 years, there are almost 300 papers related to eddy covalent synthesis across the sites. So it's also, showed how powerful of the FLUXNET datasets to do the ecosystem ecology studies. So with those big data sets, what we did first is to get each data, each site year data, and to analyze the temperature response curve of night ecosystem exchange. Very interestingly, we found that actually for all those sites, from the very cold areas to the warm areas, for each of those sites, the night ecosystem gas exchange all showed those kind of the optimum temperature response curves. And it increased the carbon sink increased with the increasing temperature until it reached the optimum temperature. And with the further increase of the air temperature, the carbon sink get decreased. So those kind of the optimum temperature happened very widely, universal for all the sites. So we extracted those temperature, optimum temperature, which determines by the maximum of carbon uptake as the optimal temperature extracted from each site here, and analyzed their relationship with the air temperature. We found that actually across the years within sites, which indicated by the those dots with the similar with the same color, we can see that across the years within sites, actually in those 12 sites which have more than 10 years longer monitoring of NEE, we all found a similar pattern that optimum temperature of NEE increased with the mean annual air temperature across years within sites for all those long-term measurement sites. So which means that within sites, if the year, in the warmer year, the NEE had a higher optimum temperature than the year with the lower air temperature. So that's the across the year temporal change of optimum temperature. So we called it thermal acclimation. So how about the across sites, the long-term change? We found similarly that in the red panel, each dot represents a site. So across the sites, we also found a significant relationship between optimum temperature of NEE and the site annual temperature. So it means that in cold sites, the carbon sink optimum temperature is lower than the warmer sites. So because it is a long-term change, so we call it thermal adaptation. So you may ask that the night ecosystem exchange NEE is the balance between the gross primary productivity and ecosystem respiration. So which process determines the optimum temperature response of the NEE? So to further review which process dominates that, we analyzed the temperature response curve of gross primary productivity further. And actually this figure shows the 11 vegetation types. For each panel, it refers to one ecosystem type, like the cropland, deciduous broadleaf forest, deciduous needleaf forest, evergreen needleaf forest, and the grassland, so on. So we can see actually for all those ecosystem types, the GPP universally showed the optimum temperature response curve. And for all those ecosystem types, it showed the optimum temperature. And across all site years, we found a good relationship between the optimal temperature of GPP and the mean annual maximum temperature. So similar to what we found for the NEE. We further applied our findings across the FLUXNET data to the global remote sensing GPP data sets to get a global map of the optimum temperature. Actually, similarly, we found those globally for each grade, the GPP also showed the optimum temperature, and this optimum temperature actually also have good relationship with the grade air temperature. So if the optimum temperature of GPP have those kind of the thermal acclimation, so whether all how much different of the thermal acclimation magnitude between different areas. I think these are very important and also interesting questions. We need to know different areas, how with the climate warming, how different areas can better acclimate to the warming scenarios. So we use the Google Earth engine to analyze the NDVI data in the past 4 decades, over the past 4 decades, and we found most of the regions globally have the significant relationship between their optimal temperature of GPP and with their air temperature change. We can see those yellow color in this map showed the significant relationship. So we can see it's very widely performance of the thermal acclimation globally. And it actually showed the different magnitude of thermal acclimation magnitude between different regions. So you may ask further that if all those sites and regions have the thermal acclimation and adaptation of GPP, so is there any factors limited the thermal acclimation or adaptation of GPP? We analyzed the optimum temperature relationship with the maximum temperature, and we actually found that in dry and warm areas, which indicated by the red color in this figure, we showed that every 1 degree centigrade of increase of air temperature just lead to a 0.59 degrees centigrade increase of optimum temperature. But in the humid or cold area, as indicated by the green dots in this figure, every 1 degree centigrade increase of air temperature will lead to the 1 degree centigrade increase of optimum temperature, which means that it can fully acclimate or adapt to the ambient, to the environment temperature changes. And this difference between the dry and humid groups were significant. So this across regions analysis, the results also supported by the across year, the temporal analysis. We also see that in the dry and warm regions across years within sites, which indicated by different colors of the dots, it showed the lower slope, lower acclimation magnitude than the humid or cold sites. So I think these are universal patterns for the water limitations for the thermal acclimation of GPP. So what's the uniqueness of this thermal acclimation? We found that actually with the further increase of the optimum temperature of GPP, it have a bigger capacity of the GPP max, which means that if GPP can adapt to the climate warming, it have more space for vegetation to capture the carbon uptake, to carbon the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Because we found those very good relationship across sites and also across years, that with a higher optimum temperature of GPP, the GPP max got higher. So I think this have a good implications for the future predictions of the GPP change and climate warming. So that's the carbon uptake process. How about the carbon release process, ecosystem respiration? Traditionally, the community think the ecosystem respiration have those kind of the exponential response to temperature. But after we analyzed the 212 sites that have a complete ecosystem respiration data, we found 183 sites have those kind of the optimum temperature response curve. Only 29 sites showed this temperature response, the exponential temperature response curve. So why most of the sites showed the optimum temperature response? We further analyzed by different ecosystem types. It also showed that for those 11 ecosystem type or vegetation types, all vegetation types showed this optimum temperature of ecosystem respiration. So this study was conducted by one of my PhD students, Win. We further analyzed what's the contributing factor for the optimum temperature of ecosystem respiration. We found that using the ridge regression. So by using the ridge regression, we consider the possible interactions and the autocorrelations between different climate variables. So after we excluding the possible autocorrelation, we found that the maximum temperature Tmax and the optimum temperature of GPP are the two dominant factors for the optimum temperature of ER. So this figure shows support our above slides, which show that optimum temperature of ER had a very good relationship with the maximum temperature and also with the optimum temperature of GPP. So with this result, you may also query if GPP, both GPP and AR have those kind of the thermal acclimation. So for the carbon uptake and the carbon release, which process acclimates better in the warmer climate? We found that actually adaptation magnitude of GPP was stronger than the adaptation magnitude of optimum temperature of ER, which means that in the future climate warming, carbon uptake process will adapt it better than the ecosystem respiration, which also reflected directly by the red panels, which showed by the ratio between the the optimum temperature of ER to the optimum temperature of GPP. So we can see that with the further higher temperature, the ratio of ER to GPP gets the less acclimation magnitude. So these results also have important implications, which indicate that with the further climate warming, although the carbon uptake and the carbon release all can have those kind of thermal acclimation, can improve, increase their rate and warmer environment, but carbon uptake will acclimate stronger than the carbon release. So you may further ask that with those three carbon fluxes, all showed the thermal acclimation and adaptation. What's the underlying mechanism? Why those carbon fluxes shift the optimum temperature upward and warmer environment? To review those underlying mechanisms, we conducted some global change manipulative experiments on the Tibet Plateau. Why Tibet Plateau? Because this region is very sensitive to climate change. Actually, for the Tibet Plateau, the temperature rising rate is 2 times of the global mean temperature rising rate. And also those region, because of a high altitude, it stores a large amount of soil carbon. So with the further climate warming, this region should be a potential have a stronger feedback to climate warming than other regions. So one experiment we conducted in this region is the warming experiment. We using the infrared radiator to warm the ecosystem. Actually, we have the 3 warming treatments. One is the control, means the ambient temperature. Another one is we warming the soil temperature at 10 centimeters by 1.5 degrees centigrade. Another is the warming soil temperature at 10 centimeters by 2.5 degrees centigrade. Very interesting, we found that warming increased the plant height for all those 4 plant functional types, including bulb, legume, sedge, and grass. And also it actually increased the proportion of the grass as indicated by this, the blue color lines. But decreased the proportion of the lower plants indicated by the fob, this pink. We can see clearly that the proportion of functional type have those significant relationship with the increasing soil temperature. So anyway, in one sentence, with the climate warming, the plants get higher, and also the higher plants will become more dominant, the lower plants get the less dominant. So we use the community weighted height as the indicator to indicate the temperature response of GPP. Actually, we found this very, very good relationship between them, which means that if we use the community plants height, we can very good, very better to predict the temperature response of GPP very, very well. And also we found that due to the plant functional shift from non-grasses to the grasses, the temperature response of the leaf photosynthesis also changes, because the the functional type of grass have a higher optimum temperature than the non-grasses. So this can well explain why under climate warming, the GPP have a higher optimum temperature, right? For the water regulation, you may remember that we have a figure that water dampens the thermal acclimation of GPP. Why the water dryness can limit the thermal acclimation? Using our warming experiments, we found that these clear water regulation mechanisms with the lower soil water content in dry conditions, actually warming decreased the carbon fluxes. But in wetter conditions, the warming stimulates the carbon uptake. So we found a clear threshold of soil water content to regulate the GPP and other carbon fluxes in response to climate warming. So by using the FLUXNET data sets, we reviewed the emergent property of thermal optimality of ecosystem carbon fluxes, and we found a widespread universal thermal acclimation and adaptation of ecosystem carbon fluxes. And also this acclimation and adaptation magnitude of carbon fluxes is regulated by the water. So the dryness will limited the vegetation or carbon fluxes, the acclimation and adaptation to future climate warming. And by using the warming experiments, we found that the plant heights related traits are the basic mechanisms underlying the shift of the optimal temperature of carbon fluxes under the climate warming. So in one sentence, by my life's experience in using FLUXNET, actually, we really acknowledge that FLUXNET is a very, very powerful tool or platform to diagnose and understand the fundamental principle of terrestrial ecosystem. That's what I present today. So thank you very much for your attention, and I will be more than happy to take some questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shuli Liu. Is there any question from the audience? If no, I can ask one question to
Go ahead.
Dr. Shuli Liu. Okay. So you showed the thermal optimality and their acclimation of the photosynthesis and so on. So probably in modeling process, to estimate the internal variation of GPP, NE, and so on. So I think it probably you can parameterization of the internal variability based on the thermal optimality by the different vegetation types, such as forest and grassland and so on. So have you ever had any experience on that?
Yeah, it's a great suggestion. Actually, we tried to summarize to review the model performance, for a few of community land models. Actually, it's pity that for the biogeochemical models, actually most of them did not incorporate those kind of the optimal temperature in their modeling process. And for the ecosystem modeling, actually, there is a study showed that without consider this optimal temperature of GPP, it can the results almost 34% of the overestimate of carbon fluxes. So I think from the site level ecosystem model, we can see that it's very important to incorporate those ecosystem properties into the modeling. But I think it's a long way to do to how to incorporate those properties. We know that for the community land models, actually most of the biological mechanisms are lacking in those models. So I think it's a long way to do, but it's valuable. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shuli Liu. So any other questions?
There's one from Dana, and his question is maybe for Professor New.
So on the chat box.
Yes.
Between soil microbial GPP and plant height, due to climate warmer temperature. I'm not sure whether there is any typo for soil microbial GPP. So do you mean the link between GPP and plant height, right? So in our warming experiments. So
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think from our experiments, yes, we can explain the GPP, the response to climate warming by the plant height. So at least in alpine region, in alpine meadows, like our experiments showed that the plant height is a good indicator. Actually, this paper is under second round of review in Nature Plants. So we will see how the community will, whether the community will acknowledge this finding. But how whether it can apply to other ecosystem type like forest, I'm not sure. We need to more build evidence to get the link between the GPP's change with the plant height change. Yeah, this should be a very interesting topic. Thank you.
And there's one from Leon. Leon also I think for the Professor Liu and that is about El Nino phenomena.
That's a very great point. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we have not analyzed this yet, but for sure, based on our finding that droughts can limit the thermal acclimation magnitude, we can speculate that those kind of the hydrological events may impact the thermal acclimation magnitude. Yeah, it should be very interesting. We will analyze that. Thank you for your your question inspired us. Thank you.
And I may have one question for Anna. So I'm just wondering how you deal with the flux footprint in your land surface modeling, because it's yeah. So you need to just the upscale flux footprint, right? So I'm just wondering how you deal with this flux footprint scanning issues.
Yeah, so we don't really tell the model about that. So we run the model at a point scale. So I guess it just runs it as a, like a 1D point kind of thing. So with a credit run, you have the crit cell, obviously, but with the point scale run, you really run it at that point without any kind of spatial extent. So we just give the model one vegetation type, one of everything. So the model doesn't really know or even have to deal with the flux footprint issue. We just consider it as one point.
Okay, so
obviously there's issues. We tend to give the model one vegetation type or maybe a couple of fractions. Maybe we'll say it's half grass, half trees, but in reality there could be quite a lot of variability within the flux footprint even. So often we don't necessarily capture that kind of spatial heterogeneity at the tower. But we don't need to deal with the footprint issue per se in modeling. Hope that makes sense. But
yeah. Okay. So that one point means it's one pixel, or it's one grid in your modeling process. So it's one pixel or it's one grid. So what's the size of that one pixel or one grid in your modeling?
We don't really need to tell the model the size.
Okay.
The model just calculates everything on a, the units come out as something per square meter. For credit runs, even for credit runs, I'm not sure the model uses that spatial extent information so much. It really just, it just sees that one time series vector and it calculates things based on that. We give it one set of properties. So yeah, you can think of it as one pixel, but the model in this case doesn't really care about or doesn't even get given the spatial extent.
Okay, cool.
It could be different for some other models, but at least for land surface models, we just give this one time series of metadata. And often, just one set of, soil properties, vegetation type, and so forth. One LAI time series, we might give it as input.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So, Dr. Anna, if we, nowadays the carbon neutral for the climate change mitigation is very important issue in Asia, also in global. So we need to estimate the accurate amount of the net ecosystem exchange. So if you can apply the model to estimate the NEE, and it can estimate the interannual variation very exactly, accurately, then what kinds of model do you use, and what kinds of variables, the factors, is the most important for the estimation?
So we do use precisely these models for this purpose. Now, these land surface models are within climate models, and then there are more specific ecosystem models. For example, the trendy project is the big one in the carbon space to get a handle of these carbon fluxes and carbon budgets. And a number of those trendy models that get used to do the global carbon budget was also involved in our model intercomparison study. I'm not sure we have great alternatives, but saying that the models do have a lot of uncertainties. I think especially when you look at the future changes in many of the carbon cycle variables, the models just diverge like crazy in some cases. So that's definitely a problem. Yeah, I'm not sure I can say what we should be doing instead. But I will say FLUXNET is definitely a key tool to try and constrain these models, to really understand at least which models are more realistic than others, and which processes we really need to reconsider, or which parameterizations really aren't correct. So the one specific example I've worked is those drought impacts, which already also have impact on the carbon cycle, not just the latent heat, which we've mainly looked at. And we've really been able to say with FLUXNET that the models really aren't up to scratch in that area. And a lot of them were using similar parameterizations. We could really say that's definitely not the way to do it, and we need to revisit this. And consequently, there's been a lot of work trying to improve those processes. So I think that's really where FLUXNET comes in. But yeah, I don't have any great suggestions what we should be using to get around this. But there's a lot of work going on to get better estimates, because you're absolutely right. There's a lot of demand for this information for mitigation, net zero, all of those purposes.
Thank you for your answer. So, is there any questions from the audience?
May I ask one question?
Yeah, sure.
To Anna, yeah. So I'm wondering, so that how many models of that, trendy models are participating in your model comparison?
I haven't actually checked, but we basically have all the major land surface models included in our project. We also have models like LPJ gas. So without knowing the exact numbers, I think there's a lot of overlap. So I think we have about 20 modeling groups involved. So previously it was mainly just sort of land surface models from the climate community, but this time around we've really extended an invitation out to the wider community, because there's quite a lot of overlap between land surface models and these other ecosystem models. So yeah, I would say we most likely have a really good number of them involved.
Okay, thank you.
So I think it seems no more questions from the audience. If you have any questions to our speakers for the topics today, you just leave your questions on the Slack, and the speakers can answer to your question. So thank you for your participation, and thank you for our presentation today. I'm very excited and appreciate your great presentation today. So yeah, it's the end of our workshop. So if you have time, just visit the link I leave at the on the chat box. So you can just do survey for our workshop. And you can check the recorded video on the AmeriFlux YouTube channel later. So is there any need for the revisit our presentation? Just do that. Yeah, okay. Okay, thank you for today and see you guys later.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.